We are live.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the second batch of candidates on the Down-Ballot Progressive Candidate Summit. I am so excited that we are doing this, and we've had such extraordinary opinions that have been stated by people as you get to know these candidates. I know it's a very, very big deal. Sometimes we don't realize how many wonderful people are running for office, and that is so true this year. We are living in revolutionary times. John F. Kennedy said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." And the two main issues involved in peaceful revolution are peaceful protest and the ballot box. And we're seeing peaceful protest, and we're seeing a lot of drama around that. However, the protests are rather amazing. And they are amazing because people have had enough. The culture of corruption that is our government, the culture of violence that is too often our policing, the culture of cronyism that is our economy, the American people are rising up. And that is in the best tradition of our country. That is what patriotism is. Patriotism is where you make a stand for the ideals of this country. And whether it had to do with women's suffrage, where the women's movement stood up, women's suffragette movement stood up in order to push back against institutionalized oppression of women, whether it was the abolitionist movement pushing back against slavery in this country, or whether it was the civil rights movement that was pushing back against segregation and institutionalized suppression, white supremacy in the American South. These movements are initiated by people, and that is exactly what we are seeing right now. We're not saying, as was true in all of these other cases, it wasn't that the government woke up one day and said they're going to make the change. These movements come about because the government is not making the change. These movements come about because the government has become entrenched, a status quo has become entrenched within the workings of the government that is an inadequate container for the principles of American democracy. That's what's happening right now. And we are on our march, and the part of that march is the march to November. November, just imagine it in your mind. There will be a repudiation of the mean-spiritedness. There will be a repudiation of the chronic and systemic injustices. There will be a repudiation of economic injustice. There will be a repudiation of racial injustice. There will be a repudiation of criminal injustice. There will be a repudiation of environmental desecration. There will be a repudiation of an economic system that has so lost its moral center, has lost any sense of ethical or moral responsibility towards planet, towards people, towards animals. And there will be a repudiation of that unholy alliance between that kind of crony capitalism and the workings of the US government. How are we going to repudiate it? We're going to repudiate it not only through the protests that are already happening, but we're going to repudiate those things at the ballot box. That's why we're doing this Down-Ballot Progressive Summit, because it's not just the presidency that's important. These congressional candidates are so important. So let's get right to it. I want to introduce you to an absolutely wonderful progressive candidate in New York's 15th congressional district. His name is Tomas Ramos. And Tomas, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're so welcome. You know, normally, Tomas, I ask people to just introduce themselves to the audience, but you quite a resume here. And I want to read people a few things about you that you might not mention, okay? And then throw it over to you.
No, sounds good.
Ramos was born in Washington Heights. This is the Bronx in New York City, and is a first-generation Dominican American. In the late 1980s, Washington Heights was being racked by crack cocaine epidemic and the war on drugs. With Tomas's father incarcerated, his mother relocated the family to Pennsylvania and then to the Dominican Republic upon his release. Later, Tomas moved back to the United States with his siblings, leaving his parents in the Dominican Republic. He went to finish high school and go on to college. As a student at Temple University in Philadelphia, Tomas's worldview was broadened, his passion for progressive ideas and social justice were deepened. He graduated from Temple in 2010. Today, as program director for children's art and science workshops at the Bronx River Community Center, Tomas's mission is to help young people get started on paths to successful lives, regardless of their family's incomes or national origins. He's reminded every day by those whom he serves that upward mobility can feel like it's out of reach for them. Our education system isn't equipped to address the needs of many of those students. Affordable housing is hard to find, and immigration and criminal justice reform are urgently needed in this district and around the country. Every day he renews his commitment to finding solutions. This is why we need him in Congress, ladies and gentlemen. He started a Bronx Rising initiative that secured $3 million for Bronx hospitals during COVID, that increased ICU bed capacity by 33% for the entire borough of the Bronx, 20,000 N95 masks for frontline medical staff, and secured $500,000 for small businesses that were hurt by COVID-19 and looting. Everything that I have just said, if that doesn't make it clear that you should go to Tomas for Congress, that's TOMAS for Congress.com right now, or go to the Progressive Candidate Summit.com while we're talking here this evening, while you are listening to Tomas. We need someone like this in Congress. He has already proven a congressional candidate is not just about voting right on the issues. It's always important to have a progressive candidate who will vote right on the issues. And to be honest, there are other progressive candidates that could do that. But what Tomas has done, because of all the things that I've already said to you, is he has already demonstrated getting it done in ways that's more than just a vote, that has to do with a level, okay, we're gonna make it happen, we're gonna make it happen. This is what we need in Congress. Tomas, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It was awesome. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. I truly admire you and just everything about you. So thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Tell us, you have a fascinating life story, obviously. Yeah. And you have, given some of the circumstances of your childhood, sometimes I see programs on television and they talk about someone and they say he or she escaped. And this always drives me insane, because no American child in the richest country in the world should be living in circumstances they quote unquote have to escape. But given the fact that certain things are the way they are, I think to any person listening to your story, there is a demonstration of great character, and probably a great mother. That's usually the case.
Yeah, and I want to start off by saying that I would not be here today if it wasn't for my mother. My mother.
I just knew that.
It's like I always tell her, I'm like, Mom, like, thank you, because let me tell you, when my father was incarcerated and taken away, I was 1 year old. My mom was 9 months pregnant. After the FBI, took my father away, my mom gave birth within 24 hours to my younger brother, Cesar. That's why, like, I wanted Mom, like, every day I thank her and I love her. And women in general, women are so tough fighters, and we wouldn't be here, without y'all. And I always say that. So I just wanted to
Your
be.
Mother must be so proud of you now.
She is. She didn't know what I was doing.
Office every day, manning the phones and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, she's in Dominican Republic. She is
in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, she stayed over there, and I moved back when I was 16. I've been on my own since I was 16 years old. I've been independent. I worked 2 jobs when I was 16, 17. And I grew up fast. I always tell my story. It's like, that's why I'm 33 years old. And people are like, oh, you're young, you're running for Congress. I'm like, well, I've had a full life already, You
have, and you're exactly the kind of energy we need in Congress. It's interesting, Tomas. I have a lot of feelings about age. I think the older you are, the more you know certain things, and the younger you are, the more you know certain other things. The younger you are, the more you know what's happening now. The older you are, the more you know certain cycles and rhythms that keep repeating themselves. And the two together make up power for social change. Now, in the things that I've read about you, I know particularly your experience as a student at Temple University, your commitment to social justice, your work as a nonprofit activist, obviously. I'm curious, and I think our audience is as well. What made you say, I'm going to run for Congress? What gave you that? Where was that transition?
So I also want to be clear. I was never really politically engaged to the extent that I am now, obviously, because I'm running. Mm-hmm. I didn't vote for 10 years. I'm very outspoken about it, because my first vote was for Barack Obama in 2008. And then I thought, big, massive change was going to happen. And, it kind of didn't. And I'm just like, all right, I just saw a lot of our politicians not really doing and what they said they were going to do, and I got disengaged. So I just went my own little route into the social justice work. I running a community center. So just to put it in context, I was the director of a community center located inside of New York City public housing. There are 189 New York City public housing throughout the 5 boroughs, which we have over 500,000 residents that live in these, in these units. And in the Bronx, we have some of the highest concentration of residents, public house residents. So I saw an opportunity, 2016, when I started working, I saw an opportunity where I can actually create educational structures in our public housing and get our children, out of poverty with educational structures, because we have, for example, that specific housing complex where I worked at, we had about 5,000 residents that lived within a 4-block radius. And I'm like, well, we have opportunity with this beautiful community center, 2 floors, so many classrooms, to actually create tangible, a curriculum that our young people can start learning trades, start learning how to use technology in a different way. And I look at it, like, education is something I'm very passionate about. So I created a 3rd space of education. When we look at the 2 traditional spaces at home and at school, our public schools have been failing us in my community. And at home, our parents are working 2 to 3 jobs, and some of them don't have the time to educate our children at home. So I looked at the community centers being the 3rd space of education where our families live. They live there. They literally, all they have to do is come downstairs, and they're in the community centers. And it's an environment, a vibrant environment where families like to be in, and where our children and young people, are interactive. And that was the model that I had a vision. I said, well, we can actually make a huge impact in public housing and get our youth and your young people and our families at large, on the right track. Because the reality of the fact is that, public housing, it wasn't meant to be passed on for generations. So how can we break that cycle, And that's automatically how my mind operated in 2016. And mind you, I want to be clear, I was never politically involved. But then I started seeing a lot of politicians come around, and New York City housing has 60% is funded by HUD, and then the rest is between city and state. So you have all 3 layers of, the different governments, coming. And I just started saying, well, why are we still living in these conditions? There are some senior buildings where senior citizens are living that are inhabitable. And I'm like, this is not fair. This is unjust. And how can we change that, And then also a lot of the funding mechanisms, I saw a lot of red tape and how things a lot of bureaucracy, to say the least. So the reason why I'm running, I want to break it down, is I wrote a grant for this technology center in 2017. It was released July of 2017. We were supposed to get it within that fall of that 2017, and we never got it. A year later, we still didn't receive it. So I did a petition. We did a press conference. We had all the politicians come by. It still did not go through. 2019 came around. 2 years later, we still have not received the funds for the money that was already allocated to public housing. And I said, well, but if we're going this slow, all that technology, the grant that I put in, is already outdated. We're missing opportunities to get our young people off the streets and engage them with technology, with 3D printers, software development, these programs that I was already building partnerships with. And that's when I got frustrated, because I've dedicated my life to empower, to inspire the next generation of young people. And if I'm not given the tools to do so because of bureaucracy, I just feel like I'm handcuffed, And that's something that I just could no longer sit back and just watch happen,
There are so many questions that I have about the very inspiring and eloquent things that you just said. First of all, when you had the money allocated, who was it allocated by? The city, the state, or HUD?
So it was allocated by city discretionary funds from the Bronx Borough President's Office. So the
grant was approved, but then the money didn't come.
No.
Did it ever come?
It finally came earlier this year in January 2020. So three.
And how much was the grant for, Tomas?
It wasn't even that much. It was $55,000. Yeah, and that's the sad part. But
okay. Now, the first thing also that you said was that the educational system is failing us in such neighborhoods as yours. Let's say you're a congressman. Regarding everything that you've talked about, the failure of the educational system, the generational poverty, not getting out of the out of these projects, the fact that many older people are living in uninhabitable places, the fact that the grant money was approved but then not allocated. What are the policy changes that you see that you will be able to affect as a congressman that will make those situations have different outcomes?
So something I'm really passionate about is childcare. Childcare. Childcare is something that when a child is born, all children are born equal, allegedly, but they're not. If a child born in my community is already at a disadvantage and a child born in the Upper East Side, that's just the reality of the fact. 1 year paid parental leave. A lot of our mothers, first off, the Bronx has the highest concentration of single mothers in New York State. So we have a lot of single mothers that are struggling. They have to work another job to make ends meet and provide for their children. 1 year paid parental leave is something that the first years of a child's life are the most important years. And you look at other countries in Europe that already have 1 year paid parental leave, and you see just a quality of life for that child and that family. Right now our families cannot do so. So the federal government should, subsidize any employer that, any parent that wants to get the 1 year paid parental leave, and it doesn't have to get picked up from the employer. So that's something that's fundamental that we really need to start pushing. 1 year paid parental leave. That I'm gonna advocate for that as hard as I can. The second is universal childcare, because even though the city passed it, there's no access to childcare in my community. There's absolutely none. And that's when a parent has to pick up another job so they can actually, place their children in good quality, childcare. And it's a human right. Every child deserves childcare. And those two things, when it comes to childcare, is something that I've been advocating for a long time. Then
I'm sorry, go on.
No, then I was going to go into K to 12. K to 12 is something that we have to completely reform. I'm a big believer in eliminating high stakes testing.
Of course.
Yeah, because my sister's a high school teacher, by the way. I actually got motivated as a student in college. I used to sit in her classrooms, and education, I just loved seeing her, teach our students. But we really have to eliminate high stakes testing, and it should just be used as a tool for the teachers so they can see where where that student is at, so they can start working around that and developing it. But the only way to do so is to bring down the class sizes as well. So it factors in. Ultimately, when we talk about Title I, we need major federal investments into Title I, so we can actually really start bringing resources into our low-income communities of color. A lot of the issues that we're facing with in my congressional district is we have a large immigration population. We have a lot of families that are coming from different countries and don't have the support system. So, and they're also coming with a lot of trauma. There's a lot of single mothers that are leaving their countries, like Dominican Republic, Mexico, Ecuador, that face, domestic, violence issues that come to our communities so they can have a better life. But our schools are not equipped to really, trauma-enforced learning when it comes to social workers, guidance counselors. Most of our schools have one guidance counselor for 400 students. It's ridiculous. A lot of our students have IEPs. It's putting so much pressure on our teachers.
What is that?
Those are IEPs are learning deficiencies. So they need to get extra help, So it's just, we are not supporting our teachers enough. Teachers also need to get paid as much as lawyers and doctors. I've always said that. And we really have to focus on the community school model. I say the community school model because the whole child, our families need support. Our families after work, they want to take ESL courses. They want to learn more about our communities, but we don't have these resources, and they should be done in our schools. So when we talk about specific policies, we really need to start advocating for Title I, II, and III. And I put a proposal on tomasforcongress.com on my website for $100 billion for Title I, II, and III as well.
Your information and your passion are very inspiring to me, and I find it very exciting, just the very thought that you would be in Congress. But I want to continue on this line of conversation because I couldn't agree with you more. We have millions of American children who live in chronic trauma of the kind that you describe. Mm-hmm. And of course, your district is one place where there's a kind of a hotbed, a petri dish of this kind of human suffering and unnecessary human suffering. But you mentioned so many things that are part of changing this. We need to massively front end the allocation of our resources in this country because it all happens in the first 5 years, yes. Certainly in the first 10 years. And what you were talking about, the first year of a child's life, to have their parent with them, the family leave. I'm particularly inspired to hear a man talking about these things because I believe that as a mother, I feel them so very, very strongly. The idea that children, as you said, our educational system, the very fact that the primary source of our educational funding is property taxes ensures that the child who, as you said, grows up in a less financially advantaged zip code will get a less quality education. As you said, a child growing up in those projects in the Bronx doesn't have any less gray matter than the child growing up on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And yet they are set up to fail in certain ways from an early part of their life. And I believe that the withholding of a quality education and quality culture and quality everything to a child in a country like this is a passive form of oppression.
It most definitely is. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
And so it's not just a little bit of change in funding here. It's not just a little bit of change, even massive change in funding there. It's a whole paradigmatic change of the realization that, to me, America's traumatized children are the next great civil rights issue. These people, these children are citizens too. And the fact that they are neglected and abandoned at these early years of their lives. And this is where, of course, your cradle to prison pipeline comes from.
And I would love to talk about the school to prison pipeline. That's a huge part of my platform.
And it's part of your life, isn't it? I mean,
it is. And like I said, I would have gotten lost in that system even more so if it wasn't for my mom, because she was able to take us out of an environment at a young age. And I did live in the suburbs of Pennsylvania and I did grade school until 6th grade, until I moved to the Dominican Republic after my father was deported.
Well, you were one of those Americans, and I've seen this with others who've been on this summit. You've experienced and seen and worked within the worst of America, and you embody the best of America. I mean, there's something very profound about the fact that you grew up in the circumstances that you grew up in, and you went to Temple University. And you have a mother, it's all there. And this is the struggle of America, isn't it? Our shadows and our light. And this is why we need to get more people like yourself into Congress to make these policy changes. But I didn't want to interrupt your flow when you said you wanted to talk more about the cradle to prison pipeline. So please go on.
Yeah, so I want to give, there's one story in particular that made national news about a year and a half ago. And you may remember, there was this boy, he was a 16-year-old teenager. His name was Junior. Junior was murdered by machete. I don't know if you remember. It made national news. It was the most horrific thing ever. It was all over the news. And for me, I'm going to tell you what I automatically went through my mind, because in Dominican Republic, there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of poverty. Machete fights is something that I've seen when I lived over there. I've seen it personally. So I knew right off the bat that when I heard that story, I knew they had, it was a high percentage chance that they came from the Dominican Republic. And I did research, and they did. They moved, their parents moved from the Dominican Republic to the States for a better future. They were escaping poverty over there to come to America to have, to experience the American dream because they were struggling. So a lot of those young people were raised with single mothers that were having a lot of issues in the Dominican Republic, experiencing a lot of trauma. If you're being raised in a community where you see machete fights and violence, that's trauma. You're being raised into trauma. and you're not getting any help because it's kind of like normalized, per se. And then, they move into our communities, and there's no transitional programs at all. So when a principal, sits down with a family and they want to enroll them, enroll into their schools, there's the assessments that are made. Where does it go from there? Because, all right, one, they're coming from a different foreign country, they don't know the language. Two, they're coming with a lot of trauma. Three, so now what are the next steps to ensure that that child is going to get the support systems they need into our schools? Because our schools should be able to support them, but they don't have the resources to do so. So they were put into a system that they were already failed. They already failed from the beginning. So those young people, without fathers, single mothers that are working 2-3 jobs, join gangs, because that's the familyhood that they know, because they stick together, and seeing what happens in Dominican Republic, and them being raised into seeing that what they came to our community and did that, and that's where I look at when we talk about youth violence prevention. A lot of our teachers, know that our young people have issues, but they don't have the support to treat them.
When I ran for office, one of the pillars of my campaign was the Department of Children and Youth, because we have millions of these children, and they're living in what's called America's domestic war zones. Mm-hmm. And they are considered to have PTSD, no less severe than returning veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq. It was reported that 40% of the girls, for instance, in the public school system in Chicago, have PTSD, clinically diagnosable PTSD. These children are traumatized. And one of the things that I've said repeatedly is, where do you think these kids are going to be in 20 years? And you're right. And one of the things that I've seen, and I've seen this in relation to children, I see it in relation to gang membership, I see it in relation to the formerly incarcerated, I see it in relation to everything. We have the experts, we have the best practices, we have the social workers, we have the people who know what to do to change these situations, but they are underfunded and they are under-resourced, while we keep giving all of our billions and billions and even trillions of dollars to this corporate, aristocracy. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, these festering wounds, these petri dishes of human suffering are just left to fester. And until we get people like yourself, Tomas, in Congress who get this, that don't just live in their cocktail party silos with huge donors. Some of these people in Congress, God bless them, they really don't know what's going on in this country. And I think what's happening right now with these protests, I think it's honestly shocking a lot of people who are in office. They're like surprised. Anybody who has any knowledge of the streets of America is not surprised by what's happening. No. And it will only get worse once again if we do not make peaceful revolution possible. Violent revolution will be inevitable. I want all of you, please go to tomasforcongress.com, TOMAS for Congress. Please start texting your friends, put his website on your Facebook page, on your social media, tell your friends, send what you can, $5, $10, whatever you can. A lot of times people criticize what Congress is doing, but they haven't actually been active in creating the changes, and the changes will be made when we have a different kind of consciousness among the people who are our elected officials. And don't think that it's as simple as, well, whoever the Democrat is, I'll support the Democrat. There are, it's not just a matter of vote blue, there are shades of blue. And so it's not just, it's got to be bigger. We're talking about the Democratic primary here. We're talking about June 23rd. We only have a week. Please, if you are moved by Tomas, as I can't imagine that you're not, I mean, imagine this is the kind of person in Congress, this is what we need. If you go like, yeah, then please, when this is over, send this tape and make sure that your friends know. Now, Tomas, we have a couple of people who want to ask you questions. Is it okay with you if I bring them on now?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay. We have a gentleman named Jason Altar. Jason, if you can join us and make sure that you unmute yourself, please. Thank you. All right. This is Tomas, and ask away.
I just want to say thank you guys for having me tonight and giving me the opportunity to participate in this conversation. My name is Jason Altar. Tomas, you're seeking to represent the poorest urban congressional district in the country. Over the past few months, the concept of universal basic income has gained traction. And this is something that you obviously support. Can you discuss how UBI would directly impact New York 15 and what that means for its residents ultimately?
Yeah, so many of our community, people in our community are working class. So when you're working full time, your wages, your annual wages come up to about $32,500. When you have to pay $2,000 rent, what else do you have left? Literally, we're scraping by. I live paycheck to paycheck. I worked for a nonprofit. Now I'm unemployed, but we're all living and working paycheck to paycheck, and this is we should not have to live like this. Universal basic income is something that it's needed. It's a necessity at this point for us to actually survive and live, a dignified life. Having that cushion of the $1,000 to pay our phone bill, or have that, or know that we're able to pay electricity next month, because it comes down to, even for myself, I'm just like, all right, am I going to skip this month when it comes to internet, and then next month I'll pay, this month I'll pay electricity. So this is how our communities are living on a day-to-day basis. Even when I'm going out there canvassing and knocking on doors, they don't want to hear about any candidates. They go like, well, look how we're living. All of our politicians have failed us. Our government has failed us. Our system has failed us. I'm just trying to get by. Universal basic income, it will elevate our community to a whole nother level, and a standard of life that people can actually, not have to struggle, and live a dignified life, and a healthy life, a loving life, and support their children with more love and dignity. So it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. And Congress, we have to get it passed as soon as possible, and continue pushing for it and advocating for it.
Well, also what's happening now with COVID, the fact that unlike other countries where, let's say England, where they've paid 80% of people's salaries as they go through this pandemic, all the people have received is this one-time $1,200 payment. Even the Democrats, even Nancy Pelosi's bill only suggests another one time. And of course, we need direct cash relief, right? We should have $2,000 for every adult, at least $1,000 or $2,000 for every child. And then, of course, continuing into UBI after. I know that has been proposed in the Senate, but the Senate is in the House of the Republicans. Once again, people need to become very, very active. This will not change unless and until we change the faces, change the people who are making policy. Jason, what is it that you do for a living?
So I'm actually a civil servant. I work for the city of New York. I'm here in New York, so I'm well aware of the bureaucracy that you guys are talking about. And so we need more well-informed individuals, and we need more individuals to actually push for holistic legislation and reform.
Right, holistic as in, even when we were talking about helping the children, there's all this intersectionality, whether you're talking about economic justice, whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking about environmental justice, all of these things are so connected. And of course, UBI is really an old idea. Even Milton Friedman, the one who was the main articulator of trickle-down economics, said it's only safe if we have a UBI. Richard Nixon talked about it. So it does seem to be, like Medicare for all, an idea whose time has come. The problem I have with, not that I have a problem with UBI, certainly I support it, but it's only necessary because the system itself is so unjust. Right. So it can't be a substitute for addressing the fundamental injustices in the system. And I think people need to be aware of that.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
There's somebody else who wants to ask you a question, if it's okay, Tomas, okay?
Yeah, most definitely.
His name is Angel Vallejo. And Angel, if you will come on and unmute yourself, we'd love to have you talk to Tomas as well. Hi, how are you? You want to unmute yourself?
Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
Well, Tomas, with unemployment being a problem in many of our communities, especially communities of people of color, my question is, how will you help bring pre-apprenticeship programs to underserved communities?
So this hinges on the idea that we can do a lot if we demand more from contractors who bid on public works, because there's a lot of these contractors in our communities that are getting these huge contracts and not doing anything for our community. We can specify local goals from impoverished zip codes. We can demand CBAs where contractors invest a percentage of profits to community education. Along with tech centers and trade schools, we can create worker centers where unorganized workers are learning safety skills, but also the importance of union representation on job sites. We can also roll back the Taft-Hartley Act, which limits how workers can organize. And obviously in these days of Black Lives Matter, we should be amending the National Labor Relations Act, which demand agricultural workers the right to organize, many whom were Black sharecroppers in the South and who today are migrant workers.
You know, the thing about you, Tomas, and that I want everybody to remember is that the work that you have done with your initiative about Bronx Rising, you've already demonstrated these changes can happen. So what's exciting to me, and I'm sure you would agree with me, Angel, is the kind of changes that Tomas is talking about, he has already accomplished. So if he has accomplished those things as a nonprofit organizer, imagine what he could do as a congressman, right?
Absolutely. You know, the one thing we ask of our politicians is that they're capable of doing the work. And if you're able to work in the communities, actually know what the community needs, and you're able to satisfy some of these issues without actually being a power player, it just proves that we can expect at least more from our local elected officials if they have that kind of track record, right?
Well, what you just articulated is the ideal of American democracy. That's what the House of Representatives was supposed to be, even as it was envisioned by the founders, the People's House. They thought it would be a bunch of tailors and farmers and blacksmiths. And what you're saying is why the system is theoretically genius, that it would be people who are from the neighborhood, from the district, who represent the people there. And of course, because of the undue influence of money on our electoral system, too often there are people who represent a district, but in terms of their policy positions, represent their donors, represent whether it's health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, food companies, agricultural companies, gun manufacturers, defense contractors, and oil and gas. And that's the revolution of consciousness that's happening today, where people are recognizing what this has done to this country. And this is what's caused this massive transfer of wealth, so that 1% own more wealth than the bottom 90%. You know, so much of what you're saying here, Tomas, needs to be done because people are poor. But the biggest problem is the fact that people are poor. I mean, we have to look at the underlying cause. And when you have the massive transfer of wealth that we've had over the last 40 years, right? We have to get at the cause, right? We have things like that $2 trillion tax cut in 2017, 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest corporations and individuals. All these corporate subsidies. You know, even the things that you're asking for, it remind me of Martin Luther King's line, if they give it to the rich, they call it a subsidy. If they give it to the poor, they call it a handout.
Yeah.
And so someone like yourself, you know, there's the bleeding aorta. Everything that you've been talking about here has to do with the real soul bleed of millions of people, and we've got to deal with that. But at the same time, and this is the problem I often have with the Democratic Party, the Republican Party has been bought hook, line, and sinker by those who honestly seem to think giving all the money to the richest is the best way to go. I don't know. But the Democratic Party, too often, the corporatist Democrats want to have it both ways, that they see the damage that this is doing to people's lives, and they want to ameliorate the damage on the periphery. They want to make, give them a $50,000 grant here, give them a $50,000 grant there, but they refuse to challenge the underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable. And that will not change unless we get real progressives in power, like yourself. Is that correct? And Angel, what do you do for a living?
Currently, I'm a graduate student at the University of Miami, and previously I used to be a community organizer.
And what are you studying in graduate school?
Latin American studies. I focus mainly on Central America and the civil wars that happened in Central America.
And what do you want to do when you get out with your degree?
Ideally, I would like to actually go back into social justice work.
Well, when it comes to policy changes regarding Latin America, I remember when I was running and I was on the debate stage, the first debate stage, and I remember when I looked over and I said, well, I don't remember any of you guys doing anything about American foreign policy in Latin America, and I saw a couple of senators jump. Because I think more and more people are becoming aware. I have such admiration for both of you. Thank you, Angel. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Angela.
Tomas, tell us more. I know that people, I can't imagine that people have not been very inspired by the things that you've talked about, talking about poverty, talking about children, talking about your district. What about what's going on today with the issue of police brutality, Black Lives Matter? Would love to hear your thoughts regarding those things.
Yeah, and we've all known that police brutality has been going on for forever, and now we just have cameras, obviously, to see it.
You know what? I don't know what's happened, but all of a sudden you're not as loud as you were.
Oh, I'm sorry. How about now?
That's better.
Yeah, no, I said that we all know that this has been going on forever. Systemic racism. A lot of the policies that I have is around combating systemic racism, and the school to prison pipeline. So I just want to touch on something when I talk about preventive practices, because a lot of the work that I currently do is around preventive practices, so our youth can get on the right track. And first off, a 16 or 17-year-old should never be in a cell. If a 16 or 17-year-old commits a crime, we got to look at restorative practices because they're still children and their minds are developing. So this is something I just want to touch upon because it's something that I'm passionate about, and when it comes to our youth. So we have to look at, right now I have restorative circles that I do with our youth, and they're pretty much therapy groups. So a lot of our youth come into our restorative circles, and this is an alternative to going to incarceration, by the way, because no children should be incarcerated. And they're just talking about their issues and their problem. And that's when I really get to understand that their troubles and their issues. And you know what when they leave, what they tell me, that Mr. Tomas, I want to come back, and we call it restorative circles. We don't call it therapy because, there's still in our communities of color, there's still a stigma behind that. So we call it restorative circles, and they need help, and they want help, and they're not getting it at home. So that's something I just wanted to touch upon because it's something that it's extremely important for our youth right now in our communities, because right now we're faced with the worst crisis, the worst pandemic in our lifetime, the worst health crisis, economic crisis, and the biggest civil rights movements, ever. So when we talk about moving forward, I have young people that are on my campaign, out there canvassing, and I ask them, like, how have you been the last 3 months? Like, they're waking up to trauma every day. They don't realize it because it hasn't even processed yet,
Well, I talked about it so much. Children are not old enough to vote. No. So they don't represent a constituency. They're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. And because of those two things, they've been basically ignored, abandoned, and neglected by the political establishment. They wield no influence in Congress. That is why people like you, like myself, talk about this issue of traumatized children so much. And when you were talking about early childhood, a child who cannot learn to read by the age of 8 has statistically less of a chance of graduating from high school and more of a chance of incarceration, right?
Yep. Exactly.
And yet many of these children go to schools where they don't even have the resources with which to teach a child to read. Like I said, we need a massive front ending of our resources. Now, you talked before, you said that there have to be three main rails, as it were, for educating children. The home, which of course breaks down when the parents have to have 2 and 3 jobs. The school, which obviously there is much change that has to occur there. And number 3, the kinds of projects that you've talked about tonight, having to do with the community centers, having to do with restorative justice. And I have seen all over this country, when I was campaigning, I would meet so many people who were social workers, so many people who were early childhood experts, so many people who knew how to transform a child's life. And they would tell me the most inspiring stories. And I had an experience all over this country where I would ask people who would tell me these extraordinary humanitarian tales of how they had changed a child's life. And I would ask, of the children who you were able to reach and to help, what percentage do you think of the children in your area do you think you've been able to reach with these programs? And I got the same number everywhere I went, 10%.
And yes, right around there. And I want to, Marianne, I want to tell you, be clear about something, because I do a lot of my passion is around mentoring young men and boys of color. And it's so difficult for me to find other mentors because the ones that do make it out, because people do make it out, they don't come back. So it's like I'm out here, dedicating my life to do this, and I'm a program director. I shouldn't be mentoring, but I have 10 or 15 young people that sit in my office, and I'm doing workshops and mentoring, and because that's my passion, I love to do that. But we need more of that. We need more people to come back and really, start impacting our young people. But yeah, it's a very low percentage that we can actually impact. And there's times, I'm not gonna lie to you, that I've been wanting to give up. I'm like, I'm not making sufficient outcomes. The outcomes that I'm making, I'm just, all right, out of these 10 young people, maybe 1 or 2 will get on the right track. And then I'm beating myself over the head because I want 100% of them to go by. I want 10 out of 10. And then I have my other educator friends and my community organizer friends that say, Tomas, listen, you're not going to solve all the issues. You just can't. It's impossible. We don't have the resources. We don't have the infrastructure. But it's like, all right, we make that 1 or 2 that help, 10% get out. But how about the 90%? What are they're left with, And it's not fair. This is a country, the wealthiest country in the world, and the majority of our communities in my district, are not well equipped for this, and it's not fair. And that is why I'm running, Marianne. That is why I'm running, because I'm doing the work. I'm doing the work in the ground. I'm in the public housing. I don't want to get into politics, but I'm just like, who's going to do this work? Because I don't see any outcomes. Our young people every single day are getting lost to the streets. The cycle of poverty is repeating itself every single day. A child is born in my community. This isn't fair. This is the United States of America.
You know what else? If you happen to be watching this and you're one of those gazillionaires who lives in Manhattan, you might want to contact Tomas and give $1 million through his program. That's what's also so horrible in this country. Not that any amount of private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice, but it is criminal how so few have so much while so many have so little. I find you very inspiring, Tomas. And I know that everybody who's watched you tonight finds you very inspiring and shares your moral outrage at the deep insanity, really. Because as we've already spoken about, where do you think these kids are going to be in 20 years? But what I find so moving about you is that you are doing something about it, not only in your nonprofit work, your community organizing, but also that you're running for Congress. And I hope that everybody who has listened to Tomas tonight, I hope you will go to Tomas for Congress, TOMAS for FOR Congress. He's running in New York's 15th Congressional District. Remember, you might not live in New York's 15th Congressional District, but every Congress member votes on issues that affect all of our lives. This Tomas is speaking to the worst conditions in America, and yet who he is and his ideas and his activism represent the best of America. And that's the struggle. It's been our struggle since our founding. Every generation plays out that struggle. But we have an amazingly pregnant moment right now because people are waking up.
Yes.
People are waking up right now. And a lot of people are saying, what can we do? What can we do? This is what you can do. There are things that all of us can do. And making sure that these progressive people get to Congress is a large part of it. Tomas, I want to see you in Congress. And I hope you make it this time. If you don't make it this time, I hope you'll make it the next time. Most people don't make it the first time. I want you to make it this time though, because things are going fast. They need to go fast. And I hope that you will. I hope we will raise you some money tonight. I hope that people are going to Tomas for Congress. Remember, you can also go to progressivecandidatesummit.com. Do you have any final words, Tomas? I've been very moved by what you've said here tonight. I know a lot of people have been.
It's just moving forward. We have to unite, and we have to have a message of hope that we will overcome this. Things may get a little worse before they get better, but we have an opportunity to just start over, start fresh. And people, like you said, Marianne, are woke. People are woke and seeing in the firsthand, this is how we're living, but we can make that change. Everybody that's listening, everybody that's at home, you know, regardless of what, you know, what political affiliations, which candidate you're backing, at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We all want to create change. We all want to advance and live a comfortable life. Our community has been struggling for too long, you know? Our children do not deserve that, you know? Our children do not.
Well, that's the American ideal. That's what makes it so profound, is anyone should be able to soar here. And where you and I share such passionate conviction is, as you said, those little children born in the Bronx have the same God-given potential as those children who were born on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. The idea that through a representative democracy, we can actually make these changes. Remember, everyone, the conditions that Tomas has talked about here tonight didn't have to happen. We're the richest country in the world. The conditions that he's talking about are the result of bad public policy. And we can change those public policies to good public policies. And I understand a lot of it has to come from inside, but a lot of it has to come from outside too. It has to be both and. As Martin Luther King said, we need a quantitative shift in our circumstances as well as a qualitative shift in our souls. You can't tell somebody, as Martin Luther King also said, you can't tell somebody to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they have no boots. Change is at hand, and we have until November to create this change, and you have till June 23rd to help Tomas. Please give what you can, even if it's $5, even if it's $10. Do what you can. Help him so that he can create the infrastructure that he needs to make this a winning congressional campaign. And Tomas, I think you're great. I'm there with you. I'm going to be watching you, and I'm going to be watching you not just through June 23rd. I'm going to keep my eyes on you. I think you're fabulous.
Thank you so much, Marianne.
Thank you. I want all of you to continue with us this week. Let your friends know about the Progressive Candidate Summit. We will be here through Saturday night. Tomorrow night, Wednesday, we'll be with Mike Siegel in Texas. You know, I come from Texas. I was born and raised in Houston. And Texas, you know, when I was growing up, Texas was a Democratic state. Even when it became a Republican state, it was still 40%. And we're moving it over. We're moving it over. It's already purple. So these Texas races are really, really exciting. Come tomorrow night to meet Mike Siegel. On Thursday night, a woman who's a friend of mine, I've known her for quite a while, Betsy Sweet, is running for the Senate for the Democratic nomination to run against Susan Collins. Listen, who among us, like, it's time. Susan, thank you very much. It's time. It's time for a Democratic senator in Maine, and you'll really enjoy meeting Betsy. She's fabulous. And I hope she wins that nomination. Friday night, Lisa Ring. Lisa Ring is like amazing. Just look up Lisa Ring on the internet. Her picture alone, her candidate picture alone, this woman is badass, and you want to meet her. I can't wait to meet her. I've never met her, and I'm very much looking forward. She's got an extraordinary resume herself. I mean, amazing. And then Saturday night, Liam O'Mara in California. 435 congressional seats. Of course, Betsy's running for the Senate. We also had Andrew Romanoff running for the Senate in Colorado. Please don't give up, because there are such fabulous people who are running for office. You know, Tomas, you were talking about hope. And when Barack Obama ran, he talked about hope and change. That was then, and this is now. Today, it's not just hope and change, it's conviction. It's conviction, and it's making it happen, and it's recreating America. And as we recreate America, we're going to help recreate the world. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Tomas. Much love to you and to all of you. Keep up the good work. It's starting to happen. All my very best. Thank you, Wendy Zoller. Thank you, Howie Klein. Thank you, Lauren Selsky. Thank you, everybody who is participating. Something beautiful is happening in America. Thank you so much, everybody.